morning, and thank you for joining the Data Exchange Working Group. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the WebEx chat panel by using the associated icon on the bottom right corner of your screen. Please note that this event is being recorded and all audio connections are muted at this time until the Q&A portion of the call. You may submit written questions throughout the presentation, and these will be addressed during the Q&A. To submit a written question, select All Panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel, enter your question in the message box provided, and send. If you require technical assistance, please send the chat to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Ms. Rachel Melton with California ISO. Please go ahead.
Working group. This is our first meeting for 2022. And like mentioned, my name is Rachel Melton. I'm going to go over to our next slide here on the agenda. We have quite a few topics to go into today. And we have a couple guest speakers here to talk through these topics. Before we jump into the agenda, I want to take a brief roll call. For those that have dialed into the WebEx, your company name is provided on entry. But for those who were only call-in users, please, if you could unmute your line. We'll start a quick Q&A portion now to see if there is any entities who are dialing in only. That way we can make sure that your attendance is captured.
To enter the question queue, please use the hand raise icon on your WebEx, or if you're dialed on phone, please press #2 on your telephone keypad.
Thank you. And as a reminder, we only need the call-in users. So if you've dialed into the WebEx, we should already have your entity and contact information. So if you've only dialed in, we just need to know your name and your entity.
Please press #2 on your telephone keypad.
All right, let's go ahead with it looks like we have about 4 callers. So yes, please unmute them and we can grab their information.
Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead with your name.
Michael Burton with BPA.
Thank you. The next caller over the phone, your line has been unmuted. Please provide us with your name. Hello, can you hear us? Hello, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Erwin Escarcha from Nature Runner.
Thank you very much. Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hector Mendoza with Imperial Irrigation District.
Thank you. And that is all of our callers over the phone.
Okay, great. Thank you. And for everyone else, we have your attendance captured over the WebEx dial-in. So let's dive straight into the agenda. First up, we have our SIP 12 update with Robert Melis. So Robert, I'll switch over to the next slide and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, all. Just a summary, for those of you who are not aware, SIP 12.1 requires physical or logical protections of real-time assessment and real-time monitoring data exchanged between control centers. California ISO RC West has implemented dynamic multi-point virtual private network encryption across what we call our energy communication network, our ECN, sometimes referred to as the WAN. To date, I would give an update. It's actually 15 RCOS customers have migrated over DMVPN. We completed another one yesterday. So we have at least 4 more RC West customers scheduled to migrate over coming weeks. Probably the most important, I see, I think it's Mauricio had put into the chat a question about this. So global supply chain challenges with semiconductors, electronic components, supply shortages is impacting some entities' ability to implement this network layer encryption before July 1. I know some of you are seeing estimated shipping dates for the new hardware that are beyond July 1. So we had made WEC aware of this concern months ago. We had a conversation with the WEC SIP audit team, and we said it was likely at that time, just looking out into the future, that there were going to be entities who had ordered, completed AT&T contract paperwork and ordered equipment late last year, going into this year, and that those entities, what we were seeing, the trend we were seeing is longer and longer delivery times. We are aware that Cisco has no longer offers any sort of expedite or any sort of escalation, trying to get to the quote unquote the top of the list, things like that. Cisco does not have a program to do that at this point for their hardware that is still to be shipped. We continue to encourage each of you who are in that position where you believe you may not have your hardware in time to meet the July 1 date, mandatory date of compliance for SIP 12, to reach out directly to WEC and have those conversations with the WEC audit SIP audit team. I do know that WEC has reached out to the other EROs, and they have reached out in turn as a group to NERC to bring forward to NERC the concern that some entities have. Yesterday, there was a NERC small group advisory session around SIP 12, and in that session, they had representatives from the different EROs throughout North America presenting on different aspects of SIP 12, and throughout that presentation, NERC did some polling questions about SIP 12. One of the questions that did come up that they polled was, does your entity have supply chain concerns that may cause you to not be ready by July 1? And what I saw there was about roughly 45–50% of those entities who were on that call and responded indicated that they had concerns about supply chain issues. At this point, we don't really have an alternate technical solution to DMVPN. It would be challenging at the least to try to come up with multiple one-off technical solutions for individual entities to have some sort of alternate encryption methodology. So we don't really have an alternate technical solution at this point to DMVPN. So again, we continue to encourage those of you who are concerned about not getting your hardware in time to reach out to WEC. I believe that the more of you that reach out to WEC with those concerns, that will continue to raise that overall concern and awareness within WEC. And I think that's the summary of my presentation for today. I'm open to answering any questions that any of you might have.
As a reminder, please press #2 or use the hand raise icon to enter the question queue. Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead with your name and your question. Mr. Lorenko?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. I was still on mute on my speaker here. I apologize. My name is Daniel Lorenko. I'm the Turlock Irrigation District. As far as a listing of entities that have already cut over to the DM VPN, is that something that CAISO currently maintains, or could we reach out to the CAISO for a listing of what entities have already cut over?
Yes, so we do track that as part of the overall project, along with the AT&T project manager, and we get weekly updates on the status of each entity. And feel free to reach out to me directly if you want an update on where your entity is at. I'll put my email address here in the chat in case you don't have it.
Yeah, the concern, Robert, would be from the session yesterday and some of the conversations that WEC has put out there, that if our partners do not have encryption enabled, then essentially we're in a non-compliant state. And so just making sure that the partners we exchange data with have completed their migration to the DM VPN as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because we've received the opposite direction or guidance from WEC. What we've been told by WEC is that if we are configured and in a position to do the encryption, but any of our partner entities are not by July 1, then it is up to the partner entity to work with WEC on a self-report, but that we would not be considered in non-compliance. So that's interesting that they're telling you the opposite.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we can take the conversation offline, Robert. I'd love to kind of pick your brain a little bit on that one.
Absolutely.
We do not have any more questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you, Robert, for the update. We'll move on to the next topic here on the Pmu Registry. So we wanted to give a brief update on the Pmu Registry process. This is part of PMUs being a part of the data specification, and we've had some conversations with the neighboring RCs in WEC. So the PMU ID codes are 16-bit numbers between 0 and 65,535 exclusive. 2,000 of these were allocated to WEC years ago and have been previously maintained under WEC's DDMWG. And the TOPs in WEC have been allocated certain blocks of these ID codes to their association. And Western Interconnection RCs have been talking about this registry process and determined that the PMU IDs are not required by their respective PDC vendors. We've agreed to ensure that the respective TOPs are following this WISP naming convention. So we wanted to bring this to Data Exchange just to have a friendly reminder regarding that naming convention that was set for future PMUs to be registered. There's no action needed at this time, but we wanted to bring this forth to the customers for any questions that may arise or for future maintenance of this registry. Are there any questions at this time?
We do not have any questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our next topic here with regards to modeling. So for the first topic on general updates, I'll turn it over to Gina Wanzer.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Good morning. So we have some training materials updates. The model changes CBT is in its final review, so hopefully we'll be able to get that published on RC portal soon. The model changes user guide, we did an annual review type deal, and we did add some clarification, perform some cleanup based on feedback from the various entities. We also added a section on the Western Interconnection Library around which documents, we're posting after each model build and where to find those in the library. So should you forget where we're posting those, you can find that in the model changes user guide, or we're going to work on posting that. The modeling submission checklist, we're also working to publish an update to that soon. The overall is some minor clarifications or updates based on feedback, but no changes to, requirements from an RC perspective. For the EIM or WEIM participants, we did add some information to the WEIM Gen tab related to VER forecasting. However, we'll communicate that update via the WEIM channels, so you can keep an ear out for that. In terms of major model changes or updates since the last data exchange working group or last model build, we have incorporated a more detailed model of the Tucson Balancing Authority in preparation for their joining WEIM. And then we're working on continued efforts to improve modeling across our scenes with FPP-RC. I think if you could go to the next slide. So just a reminder that the next model submission deadline is coming up on March 17th, or St. Patrick's Day if you prefer that date. And that's for the production deployment coming in mid-June. Email updates for contacts who have access to the RIMS RC dashboard to remind the upcoming builds. We did go ahead and initiate that, so you should have received a reminder if you have access to the RIMS RC dashboard. And so I just put a little snapshot here. So again, reminding on the March 17th deadline that's coming up for the deployment in mid-June. And then, you should have received an email update if you have access to the RIMS RC dashboard for that. And I think that is the end of my update. So is there anything I can clarify or any questions on that?
Again, as a reminder, please press #2 or use the raise hand icon. There are no questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you, Gina. We'll move on to our next topic on the contingency definition template update. I'll turn it over to Kalyani.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, good morning, everyone. So we made a minor update to the contingency template, that being the instructions with this update are much more elaborate compared to the previous version. So previously we just had laid out how to, if it's a circuit breaker or a switch, what needs to be, how the contingency name should be entered. So with this update, we have provided with some examples as well for line or a transformer or a unit. And if there are any multiple contingencies, how the RTVS is requesting the naming convention would be. One important part to note would be to we request that please make sure that the substation names which you use for contingency definition names, please you can check that against the data which we have entered in HANA on the KISO side, and that way it's easier for the RC West once we receive your contingency template in the RIMS portfolio, it's easier for us to incorporate that on our systems. So that's the only change which we introduced, and I think this will get posted on RC portal soon. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
We do not have any questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you for checking in. Thanks, Kalyani. We'll move to our next topic on the agenda, which is with regards to dynamic ratings and ambient adjusted ratings. I'll turn it over to Raja to present this topic.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everybody. This is Raja Tapitogla, KAISO Director of Operation Engineering Services. I know there's a request from a couple of our members for KAISO to talk about KAISO RC West, what we are doing with respect to this work order 881, especially related to the ambient adjusted ratings. So I'm hoping we have a couple of questions maybe that we can discuss what KAISO is doing. A general overview what this order 881 reflects. Right, FERC issued this rule on December 16, 2021, 881, managing the transmission line ratings. Couple of important dates. Basically, the final rule will take effect on March 14th. It's coming up. And compliance filings due July 12th, 2022. And obvious implementation is still 3 years out, July 12th, 2025. Order 881, it directs public utility transmission providers, owners, and ISOs, RTOs to implement the following reforms. Rachel, next slide, please. So these are the different things that this order is directing us, transmission owners, RTOs. First one is obviously the ambient adjust ratings and seasonal ratings, right? It's asking us to utilize this ambient adjust ratings, right, in evaluating the near-term transmission service requests, and also utilize the seasonal ratings for longer-term transmission service requests. Another component of this rule, it directs us to from a electronic updates with respect to the transmission ratings, right? They're requesting or directing RTOs, ISOs to establish a process necessary for TOPs to electronically update the transmission line ratings at least hourly. Then they're also directing us to use of emergency rating, right? We need to be able to determine a uniquely calculated number for emergency rating, which is normally utilized in the post-contingency evaluation, RTC evaluation. And the final component is transparency. Make sure, right, there's a where we can share our transmission line rating methodologies, right? Everybody can have access to, so they can understand how each TO transmission owner is calculating those ambient adjust rating or dynamic ratings. Next slide, please. So what we are doing, KAISO RC West has created an internal team to understand the impacts of this order on both our reliability processes as well as market processes, right? There's two components of it, VM market, Western EAM market, as well as our reliability processes. So there's two separate processes that we need to develop a process where we can receive these ratings from our transmission owners and participants and utilize them in those respective processes. So far, we have also met with the other ISOs, RTOs in the Eastern, Western interconnections to understand what they're doing with respect to this issue. What type of communications, what type of discussions that those ISOs are having with their transmission owners, respective participants, and how are they thinking, what kind of processes that they're planning to develop to be compliant with this process. Our goal is to, by the time we do this compliance filing, we want to be aligned with our transmission owners' filings as well. Just we don't want to do something where our TOs are telling something and we are telling something that doesn't make sense, right? We have to implement and we make sure that we are all aligning our processes. So we are also started conversations with some of the TOPs to talk with them to make sure that we are aligning. At this point of time, right, what we have decided that we are gonna not calculate any ratings. We're not gonna implement any calculations on our side. We're gonna set up a process where the TOPs can do all those calculations, right, based upon their rating methodologies, and they will update the final number, final rating through the ICCP process. At least this is the direction from a real-time process point of view. This is the direction that we are headed. I know we have had a couple of our transmission owners utilize this process currently. There's an established process. So obviously, as we finalize, we can definitely share this processes or this is data method format with other TOPs as we start rolling this out. I think that's it from a slides point of view. Open up any questions, any discussion, any specific items that you guys want to talk with respect to this for Order 881.
We have a question through chat. Mr. Paul Rodriguez is asking how many entities have already implemented some type of AAR.
Rachel, you can help me with this, right? At least 2 TOPs, right, so far?
I believe so. I'm not as familiar on how many entities have already implemented this, but I know that we have been going through testing with IID actually, as well as potentially other entities, but I'm not as familiar.
Thank you. I think so far we had 2 of them, right? I know we did a survey to understand how our what kind of capabilities that TOPs have. And then Ong was involved in that survey. Maybe Ong, if you're on, you can help me. If not, we can maybe take this question as an action item on our part and come back with a response. Again, I apologize. I'm recently newer to CAISO, just joined 4 months back, but newer to this processes. So we can take this an action item and come back with a response.
We have another question from Mike Keat. Are AARS required, or can we continue using seasonal ratings?
I think again, I'm not a compliance person. I think the rule requires us to both implement AAR, ambient register ratings, as well as seasonal ratings.
Right, just to add on to that, it looks like with this FERC order, the ambient adjusted ratings or the AAR are being implemented with further rulings and decisions on that, but the default will go back to seasonal ratings.
There are no further questions in the queue.
Thank you. It's all yours, Rachel. Thank you.
Thanks, Raja. We'll move on to the next topic here on the agenda, and that is with regards to RC 120. That is our RC operating procedure for guidelines for the IRO 10 data specification. So the first thing that we've proposed updating in the procedure is to add a purpose based on some city ticket feedback with regards to Section 2. This is the real-time balancing authority data. And we've added that highlighted paragraph that just clarifies that these data items are intended to provide adequate data for RC West to properly monitor impacts to WEC interconnection frequency, to determine adequate balancing authority contingency reserve during potential or actual capacity emergencies, and to assist with SOL and IROL mitigation plans. RC West monitoring and real-time assessments are negatively impacted if the necessary information is not provided with appropriate measurements. We had similar wording with regards to Section 1, which covers real-time network measurement data. So we wanted to implement a similar purpose paragraph to Section 2. And then on the next slide here for generation forecast clarification, we have a clarification on requirements 3.5 and 3.8. This is for real-time and day-ahead generation forecast data. We've added in a clarification highlighted in one of the last paragraphs here that talks about jointly owned units. Currently we have it speaking about this solely, but we've added in pseudo ties, and that these should be submitted for each owner's share. And then if the resource is modeled as a tie generator or dynamic transfer, then the plant operator would submit the whole plant output. So this may differ for some entities that currently submit only the share or only the whole plant output. So we wanted to make this distinction clear in this guideline and clarify that language. Are there any questions regarding these two changes to the clarification for either the purpose of real-time balancing authority data or for the generation forecast clarification? Is there anyone currently in the queue? I don't see any questions in the chat.
We do not have any questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you for checking. All right, well, we'll move on to our next topic here with regards to the changes from the cold weather task force. I'll turn it over to Tricia, who's been leading that task force.
Hi, good morning. So just an update, we're going to be providing updates, I think, at each of the working groups coming up soon. We sent out a survey to the WICAS community and to members of the System Restoration Working Group, Data Exchange, Ops Planning, Real Time, really to kind of vet our recommendations around data collection to make sure that, you know, we weren't overreaching in the type of information that we'd be looking for. The task force has had really good participation from multiple entities, including some GOP representation from Avista in Portland with Glenn Farmer and Tom Fishback, who are the chair and vice chair for the WEC Generator Operator Working Group. And talking with Raja about, you know, what really should be our outcome at the end of the day when these standards come into effect, you know, kind of what's the intent is if we have a cold or extreme weather event forecasted, we want to be able to, you know, just kind of determine what our risk is. And we won't know for sure probably until outage cards start rolling in, but what's, you know, kind of the level of type of information we could request in order to be able to kind of mine it and say, okay, based on these forecasted temperatures, you know, we potentially have this number of resources that are at risk, in these different balancing authority areas. So we are looking, I think after we close out the survey, we would look to probably turn this over to the data exchange working group and the ops planning working group, really to refine what it is that we're going to be requesting in the data specification. And if you go to the next slide, just kind of want to share with you the, kind of the survey and kind of where we're heading with this data collection process. So if we were to ask, and really RCUS would come and ask the BAs, right? So this would be information the BAs would then in turn include in your GOP3 requests to your generator owners and operators. But we would be looking for things like minimum design temperature in degrees, minimum experienced operating temperature in degrees, and then potentially descriptions of other types of operating limitations. And we borrowed this information from the reporting form that ERCOT has put out for the resources in their area. I will say that some of the early responses we started to receive back on the survey are that, like, the first two items for the minimum design temperature and the minimum experienced operating temperature might be fairly straightforward to collect. But some of those other items around precipitation, humidity, wind speed, wind direction, may be more difficult. They don't already have it on hand unless it's like specifically a wind resource, or maybe more difficult to verify. So we've really got to think hard on, well, what information are our forecasters collecting, and then what is it that we would want to use as part of our risk analysis for the OPA process. So when we get these survey results, we'll definitely share them with everyone. I think the survey is posted through next Friday, the 18th. So this was just kind of the early result that, it seems like most of the respondents so far are saying maybe it would take them like weeks to pull in this type of data. So I figure that actually is a little bit more time because it's RC asking BAs turn around and asking their generators. Can you go on to the next slide, please? So kind of our timeline on this, so we have presented to the GOWG at WEC. We discussed it at the Wake Up Generator Forum, and we're going to circle back with them on the 15th before that survey is due. And then we've sent out the survey to everybody. So in April, we're going to be reviewing the results and then should be able to provide updates back to the working groups. So what we'd really like to be able to do is just kind of close out the concept so we can close out the task force and then work through the data exchange working group and the OPWG to really refine the specifics on what's being requested. We also have a resource within our model and contract implementation team, one of our engineers that's really good with tools. What we heard early from some of the BAs and the task force is that nobody really has this in their databases currently for collecting this type of information. And so we may look at developing a really simple database like in SQL or something like that, have a web form or an Excel sheet or I don't know what, but it would be great to be able, for our team to be able to work through that with your team so that way we can all use a consistent format and then hopefully that would help with the ease of collection and maintenance. So I think the main question I had, I think, for the data exchange working group here, since we're waiting for these survey responses, is do you feel, since a lot of you are individuals with compliance responsibilities, do you feel it's okay if we were to come out and say, hey, our IRO 10 and TOP3 updates are effective April 1st of 2023. However, for the specific line items that we change or add for this cold weather specific information, do you think it would be okay to have that data provision effective date some point out in the future? So targeting, let's say, sometime pre-winter, whether that's you need it by July 1st, August 1st, October 1st. I don't know what the right date is, but does anybody have any concerns about kind of proposing having the specifications all ready by April 1, but then having the implementation dates later to allow for some time for the data collection? Oh, okay. I see a chat question from Paul Rodriguez. What's the criteria for generator type and capacity targeting with the effort, both DES and non-DES? It's a good question. I think in my mind, I would want to be consistent with things that we're already requesting as part of the data specification, which I think we do have defined, like, provide generator data, of certain size that meets these requirements things. So I think we would stay in scope of what we're already requesting. However, if you think that potentially should be something different for the cold weather provision, we're open to that feedback as well. Are there any other questions or any thoughts about the staggered deadlines?
Yes, we have a question in the queue.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, this is Veera Kumar from PG&E. So I have a question on this TOP3 update. So for this input, will you guys be updating the 3140A document, the documented specification? Is that what it's referring to?
Yes, so two stages. So RC West would be updating our RC 120, 120A, and then CAISO BA and TOP would be working with the PTOs to update our TOP3, the 3140, 3140A. So we would look for consistent implementation, certainly between RC West and CAISO for those.
Okay, and it will be updated in April 2023, is that correct?
Correct. That's the plan, is to have those both effective when the standards change for April 1st, 2023.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, definitely we're open to feedback. So, take that question back to your organizations, see if you've got any compliance concerns. I think we've got room under those standards to be able to stagger those dates. But also, even just determining what the appropriate implementation date would be, we could use feedback on that front as well. So it seems like it would be good information to have pre-winter season, but I don't know if you necessarily need it for your seasonal studies. Maybe you do want it for your seasonal studies, but certainly we would want it in time for you to be able to leverage it as part of your OPA processes. So I think that's my last slide, Rachel. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Any other questions in the queue from the event producer?
We do not have any more questions.
Okay, thank you, Tricia. So for our last slides here, we have a reminder for RC 120A. If there's any exceptions to data requests, we have this slide to just show if there's any exceptions to data requests that aren't documented, please let us know through the isorc@caiso.com mailbox. We have known exceptions listed in the procedure that's currently published, and we have some examples there. For our last slide, we'll go through next steps. So we posted draft RC 120, and we'll post the draft contingency definitions, modeling user guide, and checklist updates, as well as the comments template that's available. And we'll have commenting period available until March 23rd with a target effective date of March 30th, depending on the comments. As a friendly reminder, please update any of the contacts on RC Portal contacts list for contact types, working groups, and task forces. That's how we get our contact types for outreach, as well as the meeting invites for today's meeting, as well as future meetings for working groups and task forces. And I'll open it up if there are any agenda topics, questions, or concerns for today's meeting.
We have a question in the chat from Mr. Paul Rodriguez. What is the criteria for generator type and capacity, MW output? You are targeting with this effort both BES and non-BES.
Yes, so I answered that. That was relative to the cold weather presentation. So.
Right. So I don't see any other questions in the chat, but I'll open up if there are any other questions or topics that anyone would like to bring up for today's call. Is anyone in the queue at this time?
No, there are no questions in the queue.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending today's data exchange working group. Please feel free to reach out through that mailbox if there are any questions or concerns, and we'll follow up with regards to the question that was presented previously about entities implementing the AARs. And with that, I'll turn it back to the event producer. Thank you.
That concludes today's web conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.